Some of you have probably participated in focus group sessions. Some of you may even have led focus group sessions if you've taken a previous research methods course or a course like researching campaigns in the PR concentration here at SHIP. Everyone more or less knows what a focus group is, but very few people know really how to go about carrying out focus group sessions and the do's and don'ts of focus groups. So let's talk about a few key topics here related to focus groups. So I want to discuss some of the basics of focus groups, some of the reasons that you would use focus groups as a research method. I also want to talk about recruiting participants, some advice for formulating effective questions, some of the logistical considerations involved in organizing focus group sessions, and then finally putting together a focus group moderator's guide. So let's start with some of the basics of focus groups. So understand that focus groups are considered to be a qualitative research method. They provide qualitative data in the form of words, people's responses, transcripts, rather than measurement. So if you find yourself wanting to ask a lot of measurement kinds of questions, how would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 10? Or would you strongly agree, slightly disagree, disagree, strongly disagree with the following statement? Or you find yourself wanting to ask a lot of simple yes/no questions. You should not be doing focus groups. That's not what focus groups are for. You would be much better off administering a survey. Focus groups are to get people talking in detail, in depth, getting them to share anecdotes and getting them to bounce ideas and thoughts off of one another. If you're not able to achieve that, then your focus group is a failure. Focus groups are used quite commonly in marketing as well as in advertising. So if a company wants to test out a new slogan, they may convene a series of focus groups and then present them with that slogan and then get their reactions. Or if they want to test out a new product. So marketing and advertising use focus groups quite a bit. There is an advantage that focus groups have over one-on-one interviews. And that advantage goes to the fact that focus groups are groups. They are group interviews. And when you convene a group of people, you get, hopefully, interaction among the participants of that group. So someone will say something in a focus group session, and then that will stimulate the thoughts of one of the other participants. And they will chime in and say, oh, that reminds me of the time when blah, blah, blah. And then someone else in the focus group will say, yes, exactly. I know exactly what you're talking about. And they start interacting with one another. And that's what you want, because that's the advantage of focus groups, is that you can get that intermingling, that interaction among participants. If you don't get that, then you would probably be better off doing one-on-one interviews. If your focus group session is nothing more than constantly going around the room and asking each person one by one to answer a question, you're actually wasting their time because they have to just sit there and wait while you're asking the other participants the same question. So the only way for focus groups to really live up to their promise is if you have that kind of interaction among participants. What are some reasons to use focus groups? Well, there are quite a few. One of them is sometimes as a precursor to other research methods. Let's say you're interested in administering a survey, but it's such a new topic that you're not even sure what kinds of questions to ask, or you're not exactly sure what the good response options would be to a question. Sometimes focus groups will give you the information that can help you put together a survey. So they can serve as a prelude to another research method, particularly surveys. They are oftentimes used to test out new product ideas or to test out ideas for new programs. They can also be used to identify the key needs or interests or concerns of the publics that you are trying to reach. They can be used to test out new messages or new message channels to see how effective they might be. And sometimes they can also be used as a follow-up research method. So a survey may give you statistical data, but then focus groups may allow you to take some of those kinds of responses and drill down much deeper and expand on what you were able to learn from just the survey alone. So lots of different reasons why focus groups might be your preferred research method. When it comes time to sample and recruit participants for your focus group sessions, understand that because it is a qualitative research method, we generally don't use random samples. If you're trying to do a focus group about people's reactions to, I don't know, a new type of coffee, right? You don't want to do a random sample, because if you do a random sample, you may end up selecting some people who don't drink coffee, and they're not going to be useful to the study. So generally in focus groups, we would use purposive or snowball sampling rather than random sampling. How many people in an individual focus group? It varies, but a rough estimate is between 6 and 12. That seems to be a good number. In most studies involving focus groups, you don't just do one focus group session. You do several focus group sessions. How many sessions? Well, remember what we said about qualitative research. Rather than trying to fix an exact number to your sample size, you want to keep collecting data until you reach the point of saturation and you are no longer hearing anything new. Now, in practice, that usually means in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 different groups. Another interesting thing is that when you are if you have multiple groups like this, let's say you have 4 or 5 or 6 different focus groups, how do you decide which participants to place in which group? Now, again, you might think, oh, random assignment. I'll just randomly assign them to groups. That's usually not the best strategy. Usually you want to keep your individual groups relatively homogeneous, meaning made up of similar people, people from similar backgrounds, people of similar demographics, rather than trying to mix and match a bunch of different types of people into that individual group. Now, that may seem a little bit odd. You may be wondering, well, why would you do that? Why would you want all similar people in a group? Well, it goes back to that advantage of focus groups, that focus groups allow for, that sort of free-flowing conversation and interaction among participants. Let's say you were going to do a focus group session on how people use social media. And some of the people you select for your focus groups are quite old, senior citizens. And some of the people you select are quite young, let's say teenagers. Well, if you put the teenagers and the senior citizens together in the same focus group, there's probably not going to be a lot of interaction going on between them. The senior citizen will say, well, I don't use social media. I think it's a load of crap. These kids today and their crazy social media. Meanwhile, the teenager is going to sit there rolling their eyes and thinking, what a clueless, out of touch, old fogey this person is. They're not going to have a lot in common, so they're probably not going to do a lot of interacting with each other. And as a result, the focus group won't be as productive as it would have been if you had put all of the young people together in one group and all of the old people together in another group. So the way that you achieve diversity is among the different groups rather than within individual groups. Hopefully that makes some sense. When it comes to formulating your focus group questions, focus groups are led by a moderator, which should be someone who is very skilled at managing conversations and getting people to open up and talk in depth. And sometimes that moderator has an assistant. The assistant may actually write stuff down on a whiteboard or on an easel as people are giving their responses. Focus group interviews are considered to be a semi-structured form of interviewing. So semi-structured is in between structured and unstructured. A structured interview is when you have a predetermined set of questions and you just go down the list of questions and ask each one, and you stick rigidly to that list of prepared questions. Unstructured interviews is when you more or less just kind of go with the flow and you don't have any predetermined questions. So semi-structured exists in between those two extremes. Semi-structured interviews means, yes, you do have some predetermined questions, but you also have the flexibility, depending on how the focus group session goes, to ask some other questions as well. You are not rigidly bound to that set of prepared questions. So if their answers take you in new directions, you need to be prepared to go in those new directions. Focus groups should consist primarily of open-ended questions because your goal is to stimulate discussion and interaction, to get people to share their experiences, to share interesting anecdotes. You don't want to ask a whole bunch of yes-no questions, or you're only going to get yes-no answers, in which case you would have been much better off doing a survey. So open-ended questions is the rule of the day when it comes to focus groups. And you might want to start with a question that's going to make people feel comfortable and break the ice. So maybe an icebreaker question where you go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves, or everybody answers an introductory question of some sort. You want to make sure that one person or a couple of people don't dominate the focus group. That can happen oftentimes, where some people are natural extroverts and some people are much quieter and shy. You want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate. And sometimes that may require you to call on people and sort of force them to enter the conversation. If you notice that someone is not answering any of the questions, you may need to bring them into the conversation to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. It's also important to understand that focus groups are not like juries. They don't have to come to a conclusion at the end of the focus group session. You're not trying to get them to come to an agreement. You're trying to hear the range of opinions, the range of experiences that they bring to bear on the conversation. They don't have to agree. You don't want to try to force them to come to some sort of a consensus. That is not what focus groups are designed for. What about some of the logistics of focus group sessions? How long should they last? Obviously, it varies, but a good average is about 90 minutes. So usually somewhere in the ballpark of an hour to 2 hours. They are oftentimes recorded and or videotaped. And if you're going to record them or tape them, you need to make sure that you tell them that you are doing that. You cannot surreptitiously record their conversations or videotape them, because that would be unethical. So you need to let them know if you're going to be recording or taping their conversations. The responses then oftentimes, well, almost always, are going to be transcribed, which can be a somewhat tedious process. And then the data is going to be analyzed. You're going to go through all of the different responses you got and try to find common themes to address your research questions. Because focus groups do take a fair amount of time, you are impinging on people's daily lives. Generally, focus group participants receive some sort of compensation, which oftentimes might be a gift certificate, for example, but some token of appreciation for them taking time out of their busy schedule to help you with your research. To do a focus group session, you need to have a moderator's guide prepared, and the moderator's guide will begin with an introduction. I will post some examples of moderator's guides to D2L so you can see some samples. But moderators' guides will begin with an introduction, and you want to introduce the focus group session by stating what the purpose of the focus group is. You may need to establish some ground rules for the session. You want to make sure that you put people at ease by letting them know that there are no right or wrong answers, letting them know that you are interested in hearing all of their opinions. And you also want to give them the assurance of confidentiality, that their names or identities will not be associated with their responses when the results of your research are reported or published. You probably want to begin with some sort of an opening question or icebreaker, which may involve going around the room and having each person give their response. And then you want to move on to the key questions and possible prompts. So prompts may be questions like why, or explain what you mean, or describe an example of when that happened. So prompts are designed to get people to speak in even more detail and even more depth. And then at the end of the session, you want to make sure that there is some sort of a conclusion, and you want to make sure that you thank the participants for their participation. All of these things need to be put together into that moderator's guide.